It seems like a lot of people have a particular experience while getting into the EDH format, and that experience goes something like this. They find a commander and a deck that they really gel with, like it speaks to them on some deep level, and then they embark upon a great optimization quest, pouring increasing amounts of time and money into making the deck as good as it possibly can be. I went through this process about 10 years ago with my first commander deck, and I understand this impulse. You've got your baby, and you want it to fly. This process can work to some extent, especially if you have big piles of money to throw at upgrading a deck, and I encourage everybody to put effort into making their decks as enjoyable as possible for themselves, which may mean power upgrades. That said, there are actually some pretty compelling reasons not to upgrade a deck further once it plays smoothly at a healthy middling power level. So in this video, I'm going to go through each of these reasons using one of my mid-power decks to exemplify each of them, and then I'll be talking about what decks are the best candidates for an upgrade. The first reason not to upgrade a deck is that some decks have natural bottlenecks in their functionality that makes it difficult to give them a cohesive upgrade, and the most common bottlenecks here are being vulnerable to a particular type of hate, or having a game plan that is fundamentally difficult to speed up. If your deck relies heavily on the board presence of a commander that's more than 3 mana, your opponents only need to hate out your command zone a couple times early in order to shut you down. If your deck heavily relies on building up a graveyard over the course of several turns, a single piece of graveyard hate can totally blow you out, and card quality improvements alone won't generally change this fact. If your deck heavily uses board wipes to maintain control over the game, or something like Goad for that matter, you'll struggle against decks that don't rely on combat damage, or which are more explosive, which get more common at higher powers. Ultimately, trying to improve a deck with a bottleneck like this will generally lead to some very good games with the deck, but much worse consistency, with the deck getting dragged down to the dirt by its bottlenecking factors a decent portion of the time. This is the reason I don't upgrade my Shroom Slide deck. There are ways to make it much more efficient at generating value and controlling the game, but the deck has several vulnerabilities. Its Astral Slide's getting hated out, its artifacts getting wiped, and or its graveyard getting exiled. The deck can play through these things happening a little bit, but decks generally run much more of these things at higher powers, and if it encounters too much of these sorts of hate, the deck will fall flat on its face regardless of card quality upgrades. An extension of this problem is what I'll call the cheap deck. This is a deck that works pretty well at low budgets, but is very logarithmic in terms of how it translates additional budget to additional power. It gets rapidly more expensive to improve it past a certain power level. The best example of this I can think of is Feather. It's a commander that has a decently beefy Voltron game plan if you build your deck specifically around it, which usually means running a lot of 1 to 2 mana instants and sorceries that target creatures, along with some cards that work well with these sorts of spells. It's hard to end up with a Feather deck that's bad, but it's also hard to build a Feather deck that's really good. 1 mana instants and sorceries that target creatures are cheap, so you're already running the best ones, meaning that the only option for trying to improve the deck is cutting some of these for generic value cards in the colors, and the weakening of the Feather game plan that this results in will negate some of that increase in power. This reason is also why I don't try to improve my Maria deck. 1 to 2 mana equipments are the deck's bread and butter, and there just aren't that many options in this category of card outside of the dirt cheap ones I'm already running, and ones I consider prohibitively expensive. The other reason not to increase the power level of a deck is if you simply don't enjoy the power level you end up at. If you're playing in a group of beatdown decks and everybody is relentlessly tuning the effectiveness of their beatdown, that might feel okay in that context, but your deck might end up on the power level of a deck that consistently combos off on turn 5, or Voltron kills you on turn 4, or forcefully suppresses your deck into the dirt with an unending stream of hate. And even if you're still pulling off your fair share of wins against these sorts of decks, as a player, you'll need to ask yourself the question of if that's the sort of MTG you want to be playing. You also might need to slip combos into your deck instead of winning in ways that play more to your deck's strengths, which a lot of players might not find to be a satisfying way to go with their deck. This reason is why I leave my Glissa deck at a middling power level. It's a deck that wants to build up resources and then play a bunch of big stuff, winning through gaining board superiority and beating down its opponents, rather than playing some sort of explosive card like Torment of Hailfire or tutoring up a combo. I play the deck to do beefy battlecruiser things and become the big bad of the table, not to pull off a sneaky win when my opponents aren't looking. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that some decks are less ideal candidates for upgrading past a certain point. You should maybe call them good enough. And I do fully believe in this idea, but I think it's also useful to consider the terms here. What do we mean by upgrading a deck? I'd say there are two main factors that determine a deck's power level: card quality, how good the cards are, and cohesion, how well the cards are put together. I'd say we as Magic players tend to overwhelmingly focus on the first one when we think about a deck's power level, particularly when it comes to the question of upgrading, and I actually think this makes perfect sense to do. When you're asking whether or not you should improve your deck's card quality, you're talking about an unambiguous exchange of resources, money for power level. Whereas cohesion is a much more challenging factor to modulate, particularly for a deck that's already fully built. With that in mind, I'd like to offer an additional framework. You can think of upgrading your deck's card quality as a tool for obtaining the deck's desired power level. If you have a fundamentally janky premise for a deck that you want to end up decently powerful, running good card quality can accomplish that goal to some extent as long as you tread carefully around potential bottlenecks. If you have a fundamentally powerful deck concept and you want to play in a group of more middling power decks, you can restrict your card choice by budget or theme or some other factor. But to this you might ask, what does it mean for a deck concept to be fundamentally powerful or fundamentally weak? This takes me back to the core question of this video, the question of when a deck should be upgraded with better card quality. I mentioned Feather as an example of a deck that generally performs solidly on a low budget, but which can be difficult and cost inefficient to improve past that point. As a point of contrast, I want to talk about a different popular commander that, like Feather, tends to convert a specific card type into resources for a fast game plan: Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow. Yuriko decks span a range of power levels and contain a lot of variety in sub-themes and card choices, but all of them share a fundamental game plan: play evasive creatures and or ninjas, and utilize these cards with Yuriko to whittle down your opponents through a mixture of combat damage and Yuriko triggers, generating card advantage in the process. Yuriko notably doesn't have the same ceiling as Feather because she's fundamentally a faster, more resilient, and just simpler card. Command Ninjutsu at 2 mana immediately puts her head and shoulders above Feather in terms of raw power, and instead of being fiddly and requiring constant upkeep or extra steps to reach her full power, she converts low-cost ninjas and evasive creatures into very fundamental resources of the game: card advantage and life loss for opponents, and can do so with minimal mana investment. Decks can vary in how many ninjas they run and what sorts of evasive creatures they play, but these cards are basically guaranteed to be effective due to the speed, resilience, and simplicity of Yuriko, and as long as the deck is above a certain minimum number of these supporting creatures, these cards combine with Yuriko to form a very powerful core to the deck. It's this strong core for generating generic resources that makes a deck especially upgradable. There's a good amount of diversity in what a successful Yuriko deck can look like, and there are lots of piecemeal card quality upgrades and packages that can be added to modulate the deck to whatever power level the Yuriko player wants to be playing at. I think it's worth clarifying here that there's nothing wrong with commanders that are better suited to mid-power, nor is a commander like Yuriko or Corvold that inherently pushes a higher power necessarily more interesting or more worthwhile. There are also the players who like the challenge of trying to boost a commander or theme that isn't inherently high power up to that point, and that can be a fun process. I personally like the challenge of building powerful decks on a low budget, as it forces you to put a lot of effort into the cohesion of a deck, since the card quality is naturally going to be a bit lacking. At the end of the day, I just want people to know what they're getting into when they decide to pour time and money into a deck. If you have a limit on how much you want to spend on decks, it's valuable to know when you're dealing with a commander who will naturally take more money to boost from a mid-power deck to a high-power deck. And as stated earlier, this will fundamentally come down to how powerful a deck's core resource-generating and game-winning pieces are. And even if budget isn't a concern, it's worth keeping an eye on a deck's weak points and making sure that they aren't going to be exacerbated by playing against more powerful decks. I feel like there's a culture among a lot of EDH players of higher powered decks being considered cooler or more interesting, which leads to this sort of rat race of chasing generic staples and applying formulaic rules to every deck to bump up its power level. And I don't want to tell anybody not to improve a deck they want to improve, but I just want to tell you right now that if you have a mid-power deck you really like, you don't necessarily need to change it. If you want a higher power deck, you can pick out a couple things you like from an existing deck you enjoy, such as a card or a theme, and then build a new, more powerful home for it. This also goes for putting pet cards in decks, but that's a topic for another day.